Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and for today's card I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Artsy Flower Parts stamp set. And I decided to pull out my ready cut watercolor paper from Strathmore. This is a cold press paper and it's pre-cut to 5x7. And then I decided to use my mini Misty, so I needed to cut it down a little bit more. So I cut it down to about 6 inches by 4.5, which is the biggest size you can fit in the mini Misty. And then I pulled out the stamp set and I wanted to use all of the little outline images in this set. It's got solid images and outline images. And I wanted to use the outline images, so I lined them all up across this entire piece of watercolor paper. And then I'm going to ink everything up with my Versamark ink. I had already used the anti-static powder tool on the watercolor paper. And then ink up the stamps with my Versamark ink. Close the lid of my Misty, and then I can stamp all these images at once, making sure to press down really well so that everything is stamped onto this watercolor paper. And I'm stamping onto the textured side. I find this paper it is textured, but it's not so heavily textured that I have difficulty stamping on it even without the Misty. But I still, especially with finer detailed images like this, I try to be a little more careful. And once I had everything stamped, I coated it all with some detail white embossing powder and then used my heat tool to completely melt all of the embossing powder. And like I've said in previous videos, when I emboss white on white, I'm always tilting it into the light because you want to heat it until the embossing powder is melted and glossy. So any parts that look dull or grainy, they're not melted. So you want to make sure to hit that with your heat tool so that it's completely melted. So for the watercoloring, I kept it super simple. I'm just using my Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers, and I'm only using about 5 different colors to do all these, although the two purples are pretty much the same. I was having a hard time kind of telling the difference between them really, which is the lilac and the light violet. They're very similar. So I just kind of chose colors at random today. I wasn't really thinking of a color combo or following any sort of color challenge. I was like, oh, purple would be nice, and then this color would look nice, and then this color would look nice, and yeah, and then I ended up pulling fluorescent green for the stems and the leaves, which it just happened to work. I was just going by my little swatches of colors and not the actual names, and it wasn't until I started using this one that I was like, oh, this is like actually fluorescent, but as it dries, it's just nice. So once I was done on my watercoloring, like I said, super simple, I wanted to die cut everything, so I have the matching dies, and I taped all of them into place with micropore tape. Now the stems for this set, the dies of them are all solid because they're so narrow. And the easiest way to line these up is I just die cut all the stems from some scrap paper here. And then I lined the opening on the scrap for each die over top of the image I want to die cut. Now you could leave the scrap paper just in place and run it through your machine, but I wanted to line up all these dies all at once so I can just do this in one pass. So I lined up the scrap paper over the image, and then you press your die into place and you can just feel it go into place. And then I either tore or cut the paper around it so I could remove it and then tape down my die with the micropore tape. So for this few extra seconds of work here, this way I can die cut everything at once really quickly, really easily. And this works for any solid die. If you die cut it from some scrap paper and then you can line it up over your image, place the die in there until you feel it go into place. And then, like I said, you can leave the scrap paper in place, run it through your machine again, it's fine. Or you can do like this, remove the scrap paper, tape your die down, whatever works for you. But this is one good way to use your solid dies if you have trouble with die cutting and lining things up. So once I had everything in place, I ran this through my Big Shot. So I've got all of these images die cut all in one pass, which is fabulous. And then after I die cut everything, I kind of arranged them on my craft mat how I planned on putting them on card. I was just kind of fiddling around with arrangement, and once I was happy with it, I actually just pulled out my phone and took a picture of the arrangement because technically I will forget 30 seconds from now. So I took a picture so I can remind myself and then set that all aside. And for my background, this time I grabbed some Bristol Smooth cardstock. I've been talking about this a lot lately, how I'm not the biggest fan of using my Zig Clean colors on Bristol. It just doesn't work as well for me as it does for other people, but I do love it for ink blending with the distress inks. The inks just move so nicely on Bristol Smooth, and not just distress inks, like dye inks, any ink really, it just moves fabulously. So I just sponged on some pumice stone distress ink, concentrating it more on the lower corner. And then I spritzed it with my distress sprayer, let it sit for a bit, picked up with paper towel, did that a second time. So I've got this fun splattered background for my images. And then I pulled out my phone here with that picture again, just to kind of give me my visual. I didn't end up following it exactly, just because I ended up moving things around a bit, but it still gave me that kind of idea. I was like, okay, this is where I'd wanted to kind of place everything. So I started adhering the stems and the flowers with some multi-medium matte adhesive and just glued everything down. And then for my sentiment, I just grabbed a scrap of black cardstock and again used my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm stamping a sentiment from the Simon Says Stamp hand lettered encouragement set. So I stamped that with the same Versamark ink, and then I'm going to use the detail white embossing powder again, sprinkling that over the image. And this is where I really like my anti-static powder tool for cardstock, like black cardstock, especially when you're doing, you know, white embossing on black cardstock or black embossing on white cardstock. The anti-static powder tool is a lifesaver because it keeps that powder from clinging to everything else, because sometimes it just wants to just get everywhere. So highly recommend an anti-static powder tool. I can't live without mine. So once I'd melted that, I used my paper trimmer to trim this down, and then decided I was going to cut flag ends like I normally do, but this time decided to cut it on a diagonal, just doing something a little different this time. So I used my paper trimmer for that, and then I decided I wanted to add a little bit of black and white stripes. So I'm actually making use of these papers that I had stamped in a previous video, which I will link to at the end of this video, using the Simon Says diagonal stripes background. So I surprised myself a little bit. You guys know me and my penchant for only wanting to use pattern paper, and only pattern paper. I used my own pre-made pattern paper that I did myself. So yeah, trim that down. The Bristol Smooth panel was roughly 3.25 inches by 4.75, something like that, because I'm planning on making a 4-bar size card. So I cut down the striped pattern paper just about 1/8 of an inch larger than that. And then for my card base itself, I'm cutting a piece of Simon Says fog cardstock. I cut it lengthwise at 3.5 inches, and then I'm cutting it at 9.75 inches. So this way, when I score it at 4 7/8 inches, that makes my top folding 4-bar size card. So 4 7/8 by 3.5. So I've got my card base made, and now I can adhere this panel down onto the card front. You can see everything is sized perfectly. So I've got that all adhered. And then for the inside of the card, I took another sentiment from the hand lettered encouragement set, and I'm just inking that up with some VersaFine Onyx black ink. I'm going to stamp that inside the card, and then I'm just going to adhere another one of the little die cut and colored floral images that I had done earlier. So just squeezed a little bit of multimedia matte adhesive onto that as well. And I just decided to kind of attach it to the end of the sentiment there, just for a little something something. And then as a final bit of embellishment, I pulled out the Pretty Pink Posh. These are the 3mm sparkling clear sequins. I love my sparkling clear sequin mix. These are separate and they're tiny, like tiny, because the 4mm seems small. These are even smaller. They're so cute. I love them. So I sprinkled a few of those onto my card front here, and I'm just going to adhere them with the same multi-medium matte adhesive and my little crystal katana to pick these up. And once I've got these adhered, that finishes off my card. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post with all the pictures, as well as picture links to all of the supplies used. So if anything you see in the video and any of my videos that interest you, I always have it linked in the description box below the video, as well as over on my blog, which is also linked. It's the first link below my videos. So check that out below if you're interested, and I'll have a couple more links to a couple videos if you haven't seen them. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye!